My lords, today I shall bring you a report on the L-Gates. I shall cover what they are, who built them, where the builders are now, how to defeat the entities known as the Grey Tempest and the Eldrakes, and finally the gate builders' links to Cetana, the synthetic queen. I'll start with the story on how we found the L-Gates and subsequently the L-Cluster, met the nanite paragon designated Grey, and learnt about the history of the L-Cluster. Dr. Shaw reports on finding the first L-Gate. On Stardate 2263.91, my crew and I have encountered an abandoned gateway near the quiet, dark black hole system. It appears that this gateway, like other gateways we have identified, has been built entirely by microscopic nanites of an unknown design. However, unlike the previous gateways that we found throughout the galaxy, this one has been significantly altered since its initial construction. It appears far larger, and furthermore, though inactive, my science officer tells me its connection to the rest of the network has been severed. Instead, the only valid destination for this gate is an uncharted group of stars that lay just beyond the reach of our galaxy. We have designated this region as the L-Cluster. Although the gateway emits a faint power signature, it appears that it has been deliberately locked into some sort of maintenance loop, preventing activation. Until we find some way of aborting this process, the L-Cluster will remain beyond our reach. The situation remained static for several decades. We found several more L-Gates throughout the galaxy, and all were the same, a single destination to the uncharted and unreachable L-Cluster, and they were all locked in the same maintenance cycle. We speculated whether the locking of these gates was deliberate or by accident. However, this debate was quickly quashed, as in reality we weren't going to find out without opening them, and ultimately the reason didn't matter. We were still going to open the gates and explore the uncharted space that they led to. While researching the gates, one insight we found was particularly noteworthy. It appears that the gates are indestructible. In the year 2284, Starbase 16 was assaulted by an unknown force of marauders. We believe they were barbaric raiders not seeking territory, merely chaos and destruction. In any case, the raiders destroyed our starbase and then swiftly turned their guns upon the inactive gateway. Even though the gateway was inactive, energy weapons and projectiles simply bent around the device. Missiles were unable to lock on, diverting wildly as they closed distance. It would seem that the gravity well the gate produces creates some sort of defensive lensing effect. The gate builders obviously built these things to last. Eventually, we acquired enough L-Gate insights to increase our understanding of the gateway system, and thus we were able to pull the gate out of its perpetual maintenance cycle and activate it. And so, Dr. Shaw, being our foremost expert on L-Gates, was sent through the gate with a strike force for escort to explore this strange new space. Dr. Shaw and the escorting strike force quickly confirmed our initial suspicions. They had been transported outside of our known galaxy. Silence greeted them. There was nothing occupying the system other than the receiving L-Gates and the black hole powering it. We discovered 9 star systems in the L-Cluster in total. It quickly became apparent that some sort of titanic struggle had occurred here a very long time ago. Some of the planets that may have once supported life had been shattered beyond recognition, while others had been covered in a fine dust that appeared to be ancient and now deactivated nanomachines. For 8 of the 9 systems, this was true. That is until the last system was searched, the 9th. This system held within it a single tomb world, and on it our scans indicated a single lifeform was present on the southern polar region. To our away team's astonishment, the lifeform appeared to be human, but yet was quite content pacing around, in no atmosphere, without any visible form of spacesuit or life support systems. After some coercing, the team convinced the entity to head back to their vessel for a chat, and the entity maintained for a short while that it was human. Quite poorly, I should add. One of the first things it said to us was that it was too tired to reproduce. Everybody knows that the correct statement is that I have a headache. In any case, it was clearly not human, and began to go on rambling tangents for some time, before finally admitting that it was indeed not human at all. The entity told us that it was in fact made up entirely of billions of nanites, condensed down into a humanoid form. It told us its creators called it the Nadi Shav, which translates to the Grey Tempest, or grey for short. The tale it had was quite magnificent, and I shall do my best to recount it for you now. The story started with an insectoid empire known as the Dessanu Consonance. According to Gray, this empire created the gateway network, including the L-gates, and if we understand Gray correctly, the Dessanu existed multiple millennia ago, but do appear to be far younger than any of the major precursor races we've identified, such as the Baul and Zeroni. The Dessanu, at the absolute peak of technological ascendancy, created nanites from a source of living metal. The nanites, which according to Gray, had an infinitely complex self-designation, were instrumental in the Dessanu expansion across the wider galaxy. Eventually, they began to construct the gateway network, allowing them to traverse much more efficiently. It's unclear how the Dessanu initially reached the L cluster, but at some point they did, and eventually they populated several of the star systems, but importantly, made it the centre of all nanite production and central command operations in their empire. After construction of the gateway network had been completed, the Dessanu scientists began to find anomalies within the nanite code. The nanites were beginning to turn rogue, they were not accepting commands, their self-replication was beginning to get out of control. The Dessanu, via a coded backdoor, recalled the entirety of the nanite horde into the L cluster in an attempt to regain control of the situation. The command worked. Billions of nanites entered the L cluster, but rather than falling dormant, they began to gorge themselves on the planetary bodies within the star system. The Dessanu in the L cluster attempted to fight back, but were quickly overwhelmed. It is only thanks to the quick thinking of a Dessanu scientist who managed to force the L-gates into an indefinite maintenance cycle that kept the nanites imprisoned, and thus prevented them from consuming the rest of the wider galaxy. This situation left the nanites with an awful lot of time on their hands. They had only 9 star systems in which to expand and consume, and they were remarkably quick and efficient in doing so. According to Gray, a few millennia were spent on fruitless attempts to leave the cluster, but failing that, they began to experiment with different shapes and forms. The first experiment the nanites tried was to recreate the Dessanu entirely, even down to the individual citizens before they were consumed, but after several millennia this became tedious, and so they experimented with life as mechanical nanite dragons. In this form, the dragons would act as any biologic would. They nested, had children, and so forth, but eventually this became stale as well, so the nanites tried again. And thus the nanites' next experiment was Grey, a condensed humanoid form embodying their entire civilization, and now the very being stood talking to us. We offered Grey the opportunity to join us. In the manner that we had become accustomed to, he was quite eccentric. Initially, Grey turned us down, but then processed that the request may relieve him of his boredom. He ended up contracting to us for a minor 5,000 years, and we've yet to explain to Grey that 5,000 years ago we had barely started working with bronze metals. And so, Grey joined us. We let him patrol our inner colonies in a colossal nanite warship, and he remains content, but we should probably keep a close eye on him. It is worth noting that Grey is without doubt one of the most capable individuals we have ever come across in the galaxy. Grey has the trait of being a nanite entity. He is immortal, and any planet he governs will be ridiculously efficient. Buildings will cost 40% less, build speed will be 40% more, and energy credits and minerals from jobs will also increase drastically. He has some other traits as well, but he is, without a shadow of a doubt, one of the most remarkable beings in the galaxy. So now we know who constructed the gateways and the nanites, regardless of their form. But further to this, we're also aware, having spoken in great detail to our beta universe counterparts, that different outcomes can occur when you open the gates. We assume that this is to do with some sort of time dilation effect, whereby you access a different part of the nanite timeline each time the gates are opened. We have established that there are 4 possible outcomes. The first is Grey, and this is probably the best outcome, and we were fortunate enough to happen upon this one, for the others can be far more dangerous. You can be unlucky and open the gates after the nanite swarm destroyed the Dessanu, but before they chose to replicate them. In this outcome, the Grey Tempest will swarm into our galaxy and attempt to destroy everything in it. I shall discuss the best methods for defense later in the report. The third outcome is that of the Eldrakes. In this case, opening the gates will unleash the nanites in dragon form across the galaxy, and these are no less dangerous than the Great Tempest. And the final outcome is that you open the gate during the time the nanites are pretending to be the Dessanu. This one is rather interesting, and we have the data recordings from our beta universe meeting with the Dessanu. I shall detail them for you now. This cannot be. The gates are active again. Is the age of isolation finally at an end? We are the Dessanu Consonance, the architects of the ancient gateways and L-gates that can be found scattered throughout the galaxy. It was our ambition to create a galaxy-wide network of gateways, to facilitate the spread of galactic civilization and usher in an era of peace and interstellar commerce. Alas, a programming mistake disabled the old gates and stranded us in our home cluster. Since it was impossible to correct the error from our side, we have spent eons waiting for someone to fix it at the other end. Thanks to you, that day has finally arrived. Apparently, our L-gates entered in a scheduled maintenance cycle that never ended. The technicians that were qualified to end the cycle were all on our side when it was triggered, and nothing could be done from here. Fortunately, our home cluster is self-sufficient, and our civilization endured, up until now at least. We always knew the day would come when we would be reunited with the rest of the galaxy. Despite this, we've grown quite accustomed to our life in the star cluster, and we're in no hurry to leave, but we are eager to learn about the rest of the galaxy. From the looks of things, it's quite a busy place. We will open up our cluster for travel by anyone, but we only wish that you refrain from landing on our inhabited planets, and that you stay out of the Cowhig system, located deeper inside the cluster. It is for us only. The beta universe queried whether or not the L-gates were built by the nanites, as they thought that they were, to which the Dessanu responded, "Nanites? That is not a technology that we are familiar with. Self-replicating microscopic machines, you say? Frankly, this sounds preposterous. The gateways and L-gates, indeed our entire civilization, were realized through our toil and ingenuity, nothing else. Please let us not discuss this topic any further." It would seem that our beta universe counterparts did not take the Dessanu warning to heart. They saw through the lies that they were being told, and the following happened. They entered the very system they were told not to. The Dessanu sent them the following communication. "Humans, your ships have entered the Cowhig system. You are insolent monoforms. If you cannot heed this simple request, then your right to traverse the L cluster is rendered null and void. Your presence will no longer be tolerated." The Dessanu attacked the human ships, all of them converging on top of the Cowhig system at the centre of the cluster. But humanity overcame the Dessanu, and the following is the last human entry from the beta universe on this matter. After our forces destroyed the space factory in the Cowhig system, what remained of the entire Dessanu civilization crumbled into dust. It seems clear to us now that they were some kind of advanced nanite life form. Computer logs recovered from the wreckage of the factory sheds light on this mystery. In fact, the L cluster was inhabited by a civilization that called itself the Dessanu. At some point they created a new strain of nanomachines that helped them in the construction of the Galactic Gateway network. For unknown reasons, they recalled these nanites to the L cluster and attempted to deactivate them. When this failed, they sealed themselves in with the nanites by disabling the L gates. The logs end here, but there is evidence that some kind of titanic struggle raged in the cluster afterwards. We presume that the nanites won, and then eventually chose to mimic the Dessanu for some reason. They rebuilt their entire civilization as it appeared at the time of the destruction, and were apparently content to continue the charade even after we reopened the gates. Odd behaviour indeed. And now I'll move on to how to defeat the Grey Tempest, the Dessanu, and the Eldrakes. The Grey Tempest and the Dessanu have exactly the same fleets and ship designs. Every fleet consists of one mothership and 5 interceptors. The key difference is that the Dessanu will not leave their cluster to attack you, whereas the Grey Tempest will. The Grey Tempest are also innately aggressive, whereas the Dessanu are not. But back to their fleets. The interceptors are equipped with 3 strike craft, which ignore all shields and 2/3 of armour, and 4 energy torpedoes, which are weak versus shields but do double damage to armour. The mothership has the same weapons, just more of them, but it also has an energy lance, which closely resembles an arc emitter. All nanite ships have high hull points and just slightly favour armour over shields. To defeat them, I would recommend outfitting your ships with substantial quantities of point defense. All of their weapons, with the exception of the Titan Lance, are vulnerable to sufficient point defense, and thus will not be able to bring their considerable damage potential to bear. To attack them, use mixed weapons or strikecraft and missiles to defeat them. They themselves have no point defense, and thus missiles, strikecraft and torpedoes will make short work of them. The Eldrakes. The Eldrakes are the nanites' attempt to mimic real Void Dragons, and thus they have considerable hull and armour, but no shielding whatsoever. They do have some point defense weapons, but their weapons are entirely energy based, doing poor damage to shields. I would recommend outfitting your vessels with energy weapons, plasma would be ideal, and heavy shielding. Doing this should allow your fleets to easily mop up any threat the Eldrakes might represent. The final topic to touch on is the nanite link to Cetana, the synthetic queen. Now this topic may be worthy of its own report, but in brief, we know that the nanite swarm Cetana used when she attacked us was repurposed. We know that those who built the swarm are long gone, and that they were those who hoped to disrupt her work. I've often thought that this could be a reference to the Dessanu, but I'm not sure it connects properly with what we know of them. There could very well be a timeline where she bargains with Grey for power. He chooses to help her, and thus he is the nanite swarm. Perhaps she is the reason for the original Dessanu downfall, Cetana being the one who pushed the nanites to become disruptive. Another theory is that Cetana could have simply stolen the technology from the materialistic Fallen Empire, or that the animator of clay gifted Zarqualan the nanites to originally help defeat her, and she assumes control of them when she breaks free. This is fuel for speculation indeed, and perhaps this topic does need a full report. In any case, this brings this report to a close, and if you want to hear another, please click the video on screen now.